Hello, I'm Susanna. Welcome back to my video tutorial series for my sewing pattern, the Vignette Phone Crossbody bag. Follow along in your sewing pattern available on my website linked below, and in this video we will create the lining and assemble the bag. We'll begin on page 10, step 43. Locate lining slip pocket J. Pin or clip right sides together. Using a 1/2 inch seam allowance, sew around the edges. Leave about a 3-inch opening at the bottom edge for turning right side out. Trim the corner seam allowances and turn right side out through the opening. Gently push out the corners. I am using a letter opener to nudge the corners outward. Fold in and press the bottom opening even with the seam allowance. Top stitch 1/8 inch from the top edge. Use a fabric pen to mark the top center edge of the fabric one side of the lining slip pocket. And since my fabric is dark and it's too hard to see the fabric pen, I'm just going to put a pin in the center so that I can use it for lining up on the lining back in a moment. Locate bag lining H. Take one H piece and fold wrong sides together, matching the sides. Mark the right side top center with a fabric pen where creased. 2.5 inches below the top edge of this marked bag lining H piece, center the top edge of the lining pocket J. Using a 1/8 inch seam allowance, sew around the side and bottom edges of the lining pocket. This is now the lining back. Right sides together, pin or clip the bag lining H pieces, the front and the back, along the side and the bottom edges. Leave about a 5-inch opening on one of the side edges for turning right side out later. Sew along the side and the bottom using a 1/2 inch seam allowance, except for where you've left the opening. We're going to form the box corners just as we did for the bag exterior. To do this, match the side seams in the lining with the bottom seam in the lining. Pin or clip the boxed corner and then repeat on the opposite corner of the lining. Boxing the corner, matching the side seam and the bottom seam. Sew the boxed corners using a 1/2 inch seam allowance and backstitch to reinforce. Right sides together, insert the prepared bag exterior into the lining. Be sure that the lining back with the pocket is facing the bag exterior with the flap. You can see in this video that I've already trimmed my lining seam allowances, except for where I'm going to turn the bag. I actually prefer to wait until after step 48 to trim the seam allowances. I find step 48 matching the seams easier if the seam allowances are not yet trimmed. So in step 48, we are now matching the side seams on the bag exterior with the side seams on the lining. The bag exterior and the bag lining are facing right sides together. Since I've already trimmed my lining seam allowances and I have less to work with, it just makes it trickier to match the seams. Pin or clip along the top raw edges. We will sew using a 1/2 inch seam allowance around the top edge. Here's just a tip: if you find it hard to sew this using a 1/2 inch seam allowance, first baste with a 1/4 inch seam allowance and then go back and sew your 1/2 inch seam allowance. It just keeps the bag from shifting around as you sew. It makes it a lot easier. You can see my 1/4 inch basting stitch and then my final 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm just going to trim that top edge close to my 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm using pinking shears because the Essex linen that I'm sewing with has frayed quite a bit, but you can use regular scissors. Reach through the opening in the bag lining and turn the bag right side out. Fold in and press the opening in the lining even with the seam allowance. Locate the 1.5 inch by 5 inch piece of Ultrafirm stabilizer and fabric glue. reach inside the opening in the lining and glue the piece of ultra firm stabilizer to the wrong side of the exterior base. You may notice I folded the stabilizer in half. The reason I did this is I just didn't want to get glue all over my bag, so I folded glue side to glue side, and then once it's inside, I unfold it, you can't see that on the video, and press it to the wrong side of the exterior. Pin or clip the opening in the lining. Using a smaller stitch length, sew the opening closed with an 1/8 inch seam allowance. Be sure to backstitch at the beginning and the end. Push the lining down inside the bag, and this is a good time to press out any wrinkles on the exterior of the bag or to press the top edge. We're on the very last step for this video, which is step 54, to top stitch 1/8 inch from the top edge of the bag. You can set aside your bag for now. Join me in the next video as we make the adjustable crossbody strap. Thanks for watching. Happy sewing!